Much for jumping in at 4 o'clock on a Friday into what I'm sure is just another Zoom and another Zoom and another Zoom. But we have a very important election coming up, which obviously every single person on this call knows. And today's Zoom really grew out of the questions and the changes that continuously keep happening to our elections process here in Ohio. And so as we were putting together FAQ after FAQ and image after image for the upcoming election, we just decided, let's have a conversation and see if anyone has any questions, and we'll answer them. And if I can't answer a question for you today, I will get you an answer before October 6th, before voting begins. And within the week, if your question comes even before that about registering to vote. So thank you everyone for joining us. First thing, can everyone see my screen where it says make a plan? Yep. Thanks, Susan. So today we're really going to talk about a few main things. I want to make sure everyone understands the logistics of voting this year and how hopefully you can help answer questions for others as well. So this isn't just about, I know a lot of you on the call will know some of the things that I'm going to say today, but I want you to feel emboldened to be able to let other people know about the voting process and to make sure that you are confidently going into the election and letting all your friends and family know about what it is that they need to do with their specific scenario, because everybody's voting scenarios and roadblocks and barriers are a little bit different. And so make sure you are as equipped as possible to be able to deal with that. So you'll see over here on the left hand side of my screen is the Matriots voting plan. I will send this to you at the end of today as a PDF, and it's also on Instagram where you can actually fill it out and share on Instagram if that's an option for you. But today I'm going to go through common questions for the different ways that you can vote this year, which are early in person, absentee mail-in, which I will continuously tell you can also be dropped off at your county board of elections. So it's a mail-in / drop ballot in actuality, or election day in person. And then as far as the next steps of your voting plan, I hope everyone knows where or how they're voting and how you're tracking your vote. So as you begin the steps, and for mail-in, there are multiple steps here. And as you take those, I want to make sure that everyone knows how to track their ballot and be paying attention to make sure that your vote definitely gets counted. The last thing, of course, at the Matriots, at the end of the day, we are here to elect more women to Ohio office, right? And so we're not going to put together a voting plan without asking you about women who inspire you and women who are running. And because our election this year and every year is mostly regulated and managed by our Secretary of State, I just wanted to bring up a little bit of some facts about that. There have been 9 men named William who have been Ohio's Secretary of State, and 1 woman. So tuck that away is another reason that we need to elect more women. And that 1 woman, by the way, is a Matriot, and she's on the ballot this year. Anybody know who that is? She's on the ballot. She's not running for Secretary of State. She was Secretary of State. Anybody? Anybody? You can use the chat feature. No, it's Jennifer Bruner, who is running for Ohio Supreme Court. So from 2000, I believe, 11 to 17, she was our Secretary of State. Okay, so first thing, there we go. I want to talk about is, first things first, we got to make sure before someone can vote that they're registered to vote. right? So this is step one of step one, first things first. I know that everyone on this call is likely already registered to vote. I want you to put into your mindset every year just to check your registration. Go online, check your registration, make sure you're in the system. People are dropped off year by year. If you haven't voted in many years, there could be other reasons. There could be snafus with the system for why you're not registered. So add to your plan, please, to just check your registration. Once you know you're definitely registered and good to go, and again, I'm sure that all of you are already registered. Although this is one thing, if you're not, and for your friends and family who may not be registered, this is one of the things that you can do online. So most of the processes that I'm going to talk about today, you've got to print something off, you got to mail it in, it has to be confirmed, and then they send you something else, right? But for registration, you can go online to voteohio.gov, and you'll hear me today talk about voteohio.gov all the time. It's really the voter toolkit for the state of Ohio. It is where the most up-to-date information is. There are lots of different resources that are perfectly fine, that have good information, but the Ohio Secretary of State's really is sort of the one ultimate place that will be updated absolutely. And especially, as I'll talk about later, there's a lot of lawsuits that are still pending right now. And so as those change, voteohio.gov really is that one place that's a one-stop shop for pretty much everything. In fact, even the voter lookup to look up your registration is there as well. I just gave you the quicker version of that. But send anyone you know who maybe hasn't registered to voteohio.gov. The online system is fairly seamless for people to register to vote. This is also a place where you can update your address. There are a few instances where I would suggest people don't do that. If you have a college student, anybody on here have a college student? If you have a college student who's changing an address, I would suggest they fill out the PDF form, the old school printed form. The reason is their address on their license may not match the address that they're trying to update. And if that's the case, the online system does not like that. So go ahead and have them do the manual one for college students. But really, everybody can start at voteohio.gov to get your friends and family registered. So last little slide here is just an FYI, but this is essentially who is eligible to vote in Ohio. You can register as long as you qualify as a US citizen. You've been a resident of Ohio for 30 days before the election. So that's October 5, right? October 5 is that last and final day that people can register to vote. You've got to be 18, so you can be 17 years old and register as long as you're within a year of the next election. Frankly, over the next 40 days or however many odd days we've got left, I wouldn't worry so much about 17-year-olds unless they're going to be 18 in the next 30 days. Let's worry about getting those folks for 2021 registered next year. Any other questions? Any questions on registering to vote? Anybody running into any roadblocks? Anything anyone wants to bring up about registering to vote? Any surprises? You can unmute if you have one, or you can also throw questions in the chat at any time, and we'll get to those as we go along. Okay. Let's talk mail-in ballot. This is absentee. So technically, and you may hear this, absentee voting is technically early in person is absentee, and then absentee by mail-in ballot are both absentee as far as the nomenclature of the Secretary of State's office. When you request your mail-in ballot, you have to fill out a form to request that the ballot be sent to you. Now, everyone probably here has received, can you see that? This is the envelope for the absentee ballot application that was sent to everyone's home. You may have already filled out a request and gotten one of these. So I got one of these in the mail. This is to me, to my home. I got it, but I've already filled out a request form. They sent one to everybody, regardless of what's going on in your county. That's okay. Go ahead and just keep this. I wouldn't toss it, but go ahead and keep it, but you don't need to take any further action. In fact, filling this out a second time just makes more work for your county board of elections, so don't mess with it. If you haven't filled it out, this is a nice, slightly quicker way for your board of elections to be able to process your request. So you're only filling out a request if you want an absentee ballot to come to your home in the mail. That's what this is that was sent to you. If you've already done this, you can check, and I'll talk about this a lot, but you can check and track at voteohio.gov. It's down there in red on my slide here. You can track that ballot if you're not sure whether they've got it, whether there's a problem. And problems, let's talk about some of the common problems that happen with absentee ballot requests. So a couple of things. Number one, your date of birth. They ask you for your date of birth. Month, day, year. Month, day, year. It's the typical US equivalent for putting in a date. That is not the way it is in all countries. If anyone's confused, if you put that in wrong, so my birthday's April 5. If I flip the month and the date, this isn't going to be valid. They're not going to be sure that that's definitely me. So think about that and make sure that you're getting your dates in with the month and then the day and then the year. Same thing goes when you sign it and put in today's date. Sign it, sign it, sign it. Make sure you sign it. The signature will be matched with the signature that your county board of elections has on file for you. The signature that they have on file for you is most likely, they can keep several different signatures on file for you. It's most likely going to be the one that you used the last time you went to vote. So if you voted in person, if you voted in the last couple of years, you may, in person, you may remember it's like a little digital signature that you put on there. That's the one. So you want to get as close to that. So I would recommend you use your typical signature. If there's a problem with your signature, if it's changed for some reason in the last year, that's certainly something that and we'll talk about this later when we talk about lawsuits, but there is a lawsuit about how subjective the signature matching is. If you know for sure, you know someone, your dad had a stroke, right? And you know that the signature is not going to match, put a Post-it in with that. Also, if you think there's any issues, one of the things that's optional on your absentee ballot application is your contact information. They ask you for your telephone number and your email. Go ahead and add that. I know some people don't like to give out extra information. The reason you're giving it here is that if there's a problem with your application, they have more than one way to contact you. So this is very helpful. This is also helpful if for some reason this doesn't work out and you end up voting provisionally. If you have something that has to be corrected, perhaps an address issue, or you don't have an ID when you go in person, any of those reasons, and you have to correct something after you vote provisionally, you want them to have as much contact information to be able to let you know that that needs to happen. So please, please, please add that information even if you don't really feel like it. And I know sometimes we don't, but it's there for that purpose. So I would encourage people to do that. So this ballot request form, you can drop this off in person at your county board of elections, and that list is at voteohio.gov, and you'll click on your county. And just an FYI on that, in Summit County and in Lucas County, it's not the same location. They have a special early voting center in a different address than their location, their typical Board of Elections location. All the rest of the counties, the other 86 counties in Ohio, are going to be going to the location of your county Board of Elections. All of those addresses are listed at voteohio.gov. So I would suggest, with everything going on with the post office, I'm a big fan of using those drop boxes. The drop boxes will be available 24/7 starting October 6th, or you can drop it off. You can literally walk it in and hand it at the counter as well. The date I'm giving you to return a request to get a ballot is October 20. That's really pushing it, because they still have to process this, decide that yes, you are in fact Alyssa Schneider or Susan Riley or Christy Farnbach, and then send out your unique sample ballot, or not sample ballot, your unique ballot to you back in the mail. So October 20 is really pushing it, because you need to have this back in the mail on November 2. So my suggestion is to drop it off, and drop it off by October 20th. By statute, you have until October 31st. There's no way that you can turn this in and they're going to turn around, mail you, and get it back in the mail. It's bad USPS post office math, frankly. And so even though that's the statute, I really encourage you, earlier is better. Earlier is better altogether. There's lots of questions about this election, and more people interested than ever. And so because of that, I just encourage you to get your voting done, however you do it, on the earlier end, unless you're going to vote on November 3. Because if you get it done earlier, that leaves more time for your Board of Elections to really get it right for the rest of the election cycle. And then also on November 3rd, hopefully there are less lines as well. So if you're going to send it by mail, ASAP, like today, tomorrow, very quickly. If it's not already in, please encourage people to do that. And again, the closer we get past October 6th, when mail-in ballots will actually go out in the mail, and people can actually start voting and returning them, I really encourage you to get those in early and use the drop box rather than using the post office whenever you can. Okay, any other questions? I think we've got a question in the chat. Bridget, can you tell me what that is?
Yep, it's from Susan. She asks if both the ballot request and the ballot itself require a stamp, or if they're postmarked.
So they both will require a stamp. This is one of the things that has went through a lawsuit. This is the one of the 4 lawsuits about 4 different issues that have been put out about the election of 2020 in Ohio. You're going to need to use a stamp. For the mail-in ballot, it is likely that you will need only one forever stamp, one first-class postage stamp. If your ballot is 2 pages, most ballots are 1 page. Even in, for example, most ballots in Franklin County are likely to be 1 page. That's a larger county, right? With lots of issues on the ballot and things like that. And that one is still going to be a single sheet. If it's a single sheet, you can use, generally you should be able to use 1 postage. If you have 2 sheets, I'd add a second forever stamp when you mail the ballot back. But both the application, and in fact, I'll show you here. This is the envelope that Frank LaRose sent out, and you can see their postage required, right? It's going to look like that as well. There was a lot of conversation, a lot of back and forth with the legislature about one, who had the authority, and two, if Frank LaRose could do it, and three, if he had the budget to do it. Bottom line is, it's not happening. You will have to put your postage stamp on. Your other option is to drive it to your county's Board of Election and put it in the drop box or take it inside. All right, any other questions on mail-in ballots? This is frankly the most confusing part of the process. The only other thing perhaps maybe I would say is if you've requested a mail-in ballot, but now you decide you want to vote in person, if you've requested it, if you've started the chain, you should complete the chain with mail-in ballot. If you end up not being registered to vote mail-in, right, because they're counting you one way in the system. If you show up on election day, the roster judge, so the people that you walk up to, you know, when you vote and you walk up and it says, you know, A through F in this line, when you walk up there, they'll have in there that you've requested and received an absentee ballot. So when you walk up, if that's the case, you can vote provisionally, but now you're voting provisionally. I'd much rather see you and anyone complete the process with the way that they started. This is also, and there's been some talk about this, is challenging the system. One, you can't attempt to vote two ways. Ohio will figure it out. We have all kinds of fail safes in to be able to figure that out. And then also I would just say, you know, please remember that every time you challenge the system in some way like that, you're also testing your county boards of elections, who have lots and lots and lots going on right now and are working really, really hard. So if you've requested one, vote that way. If something happens and you are not in fact eligible, or something would happen with your application, first I would call your county board of elections and verify that. And then if you absolutely have to, if you don't get that ballot, if something happens between October 6th and November 3, you can vote provisionally at your polling location on November 3rd. That's not something you would do at the County Board of Elections. That's something you'll do at your polling location. One other thing on mail-in ballots, are more people voting and wanting to vote via mail-in? I think we all know the answer is yes, but here's the real numbers. As of 9/18, there's been almost 1.8 absentee ballot applications received in Ohio. At this time in 2016, only 800,000. So over double. In the last week, in the week before 9/18, 400,000 absentee ballot requests were turned in. Now, I will say those numbers are probably a little inflated, because when people got these envelopes, some people filled it out a second time. So the ultimate number might go down, but again, week after week, more and more people are opting for mail-in ballots. Okay, questions on mail-in ballots. We've got a couple here, I think.
Yeah, we've got one from Meredith Lawson Rowe, who's watching on Facebook. She asked, if you have the request form with no envelope, is it okay to place the absentee application form in the drop box?
Yes. Okay. Yes, you can turn your form in via the drop box or directly to your county board of elections. That is something that you or a family member needs to do. Those cannot be dropped off in batch. Same thing goes for your actual absentee mail-in ballot itself and the request. Any other questions on mail-in ballots? Cool. This is the hardest most confusing piece of this. If you can figure out the mail-in ballot process and make that work for you, you are a voting champion and you should feel good about it. All right, now let's talk voting early in person. If you do not have a serious concern in relationship to COVID, so if you're not going places in person and you're worried about the safety there, certainly vote absentee mail-in ballot. And certainly if you know somebody who has transportation issues, absentee mail-in ballot is really the way to go. If you don't qualify for one of those reasons, I would encourage people to vote early in person. I know a lot of us, and myself included, I am a mega, like, I love the experience on election day of being able to vote in person. I love the physical sticker, right? I get it. This year is a year to really consider voting early in person. Your county boards of elections, I'll say a few things. Your county boards of elections are most likely to be the most safe, most controlled environment. I'll talk a little bit about the safety plan for all polling locations, whether you vote November 3 or early, but you really will have an experience going to your county board of elections where things are just a little bit more controlled. There's more staff there. They're day after day doing the same process. And so if you have any concerns, I just think that from that perspective, your county boards of elections are going to be some of the safest environments that you're going to be in. Also, if there is a question on your address or your location, if you vote early, if it's within your county, that can be a little bit more streamlined than actually having to go from one polling location to another polling location, which can sometimes happen. And so voting early in person, as long as you're within one county, streamlines that. So there are just a lot of advantages to voting early in person. This also frees up your county board of elections to be able to get as many voters out of the way and safely counted before election day. Votes aren't counted before election day, but the votes are cast before election day. So what you need to vote early in person, I have this information on 2 slides. I also have this on our election day slide, but you do need to bring an ID with you to the polls. This can include an Ohio driver's license, so a current valid photo ID. If you don't have a driver's license, but you have an Ohio ID, both of those are, frankly, your most streamlined way to be able to vote in person. Military IDs also qualify. If you don't have either of those, a copy of a current utility bill, a bank statement, a government check, a paycheck, or another government document that shows the voter's name and the current address of the voter will be accepted at the early vote center in your county and on election day. Some people may think that this pretty official, and in fact it says official election mail that was sent to me at my home and has my name and my address and my current address on it from the Board of Elections, this does not count. So bring that utility, bank statement, government check, paycheck, one of those, and not sort of what might feel like an official thing from your board, which is official, but it is not considered an ID for you or for anyone else. Where are you going to go vote? If you're voting early, which early voting starts October 6th and it runs through November 2nd, so that Monday at 2 p.m. When you vote early, you're going to go to your county's early vote center. Almost all early vote centers are the same as your Board of Elections office location. Lucas County and Summit County have a separate address. All the correct addresses are at voteohio.gov and are listed county by county. You cannot go, right? I live in Franklin County. I cannot go to an early vote center in Cuyahoga County and vote. Let's just say I'm up there for work. I can't do that. I have to vote in your home residence in the county in which you live. Any other questions on voting early in person? So the last 2 weekends, there is weekend voting, and as time goes by, things are more and more open, and we'll have the full listing is listed in the FAQs of all the dates and times between October 6th and November 2. But generally weekdays, starting October 6th from 8 to 4, and then as weeks go by, it gets a little bit later. And then the latest will be 7 p.m. on weekdays, and then for several hours on Saturday and Sunday, the 24th, 25th, and then the 30th and 31st. You can early vote. And it tends to be, there's still an experience, you still get a sticker. There's still a selfie station. There are simply, usually in most counties, there are more voting machines than you'll see in your specific polling election or voting location on election day. All right, any other questions? Ask me anything about voting early in person. What do we got?
We have 2 questions in the chat. So GJ Sillyman asked, did you say that no votes of any kind are counted before election day? Does that mean the counts happen or begin on election day?
Yeah, so the Board of Elections are allowed to open up and prep early votes, but the actual going through the machine and the actual counts happen after 7:30 on election day. So there isn't someone who's secretly counting prior and knows what's up with early. And we'll talk a little bit later about how that's going to impact election night. And it impacts every election night, right? We all know about the waiting. But our usual waiting on really close races until 2, 3 in the morning, you can go ahead and go to bed because it's going to be a couple of days at least until we really know the outcome. And I'll talk more about that later. What's the next question?
And Susan Riley said, I don't think a passport is a valid ID, correct, for voting?
Correct. It is not a valid ID. That's correct. If you do not have an ID with you, you can vote provisionally with the last 4 digits of your social security number. If you don't have that, you still can vote provisionally, but you are probably going to have to cure that in the 7 days after the election and get the information to your county boards of elections. So if you don't have an ID, you can't be turned away, but you're going to have to vote provisionally, and you perhaps are going to have to supply more information for your vote to be counted. But no, passports do not qualify. Okay. Your other option, voting election day. And actually, let's go ahead and take right now a poll about what your plan is. Now that we've talked about a couple of the options and you have the third option here, how is it that you plan to vote? So we'll take a quick Matriots straw poll just to see where we track versus other folks. So voting on election day, is it safe to vote in person? And this goes for voting early in person. Ohio has put in place a safety plan very specific to COVID-19 and the pandemic. And there are 48 different points that all county board of elections have to comply with. These include they have to routinely clean the voting machines and e-poll books. Many counties are using, for example, you can see here on this pen, there's like a little, you know, what do you call that? Like a little digital signer for a screen pen. Some are going to be providing disposable versions of this so that you can sign and then toss it. That isn't required by all of them. You also could certainly bring your own pen like this if you have one that has that on there. Masks are required for all poll workers and anyone who is in the polling location neutral zone. So it is strongly encouraged if somebody refuses to wear a mask who is a voter, they can still vote. That is by law, no one is turned away from being able to vote. Masks are obviously highly encouraged at all of these locations, and all poll workers, so anyone you come in contact with that's in the neutral zone is required to wear that, but the voter themselves is not required to do so. There's all kinds of social distancing recommendations. For example, you know, the provisional vote table has to be at least 6 feet away from the roster judges where you normally sign in, right, and validate your voting identity. Those all have to be 6 feet away. There's lots of rules like that. Curbside voting is also available. Essentially, the process, from what I understand at this point, is that they'll take an envelope out, you'll sign that, they'll verify it against the voting roster, and then allow you to be able to vote curbside. That is required to be available at each polling location on election day. On election day, where can you vote? Your polling location. There are a number of polling locations that have been changed. The understanding right now is that nursing homes for sure, but many of the other locations that had been deemed unsafe for the primary, which of course ended up being a totally different can of worms, but many of those will be open. You can find your polling location at voteohio.gov. If you're voting election day, I really recommend that you double check that a day or two before, just so that you definitely know where you're going. And then you have from 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. On Tuesday, November 3rd to vote at your polling location. If you were there and you were in line at 7:30, you get to vote. So if you're in line at 7:35, they can cut that line off. But if you're in line at 7:30 and it takes you another 20 minutes to get up there to vote, you can do so. Any other questions about voting election day? Bridget, you got anything for me?
Nope, nothing in the chat.
Again, just a reminder on voting election day, you need to bring the same things that we talked. The ID requirements are the same as early in person. No surprises. Becoming a poll worker. How many people, I don't have an official poll on this, but how many people have registered to become poll workers this year? Susan, Christy, who else? Bridget. Good. I would encourage you, if you feel comfortable from a safety perspective. I'm also being a poll worker this year. If you can do it, consider it. One, if you really want to get into the data nerd and be, just an election day hero, there's a listing the Ohio Secretary of State has on his website, county by county, how many Republicans and Democrats are needed for every single county, and has a countdown of how many poll workers they have. So if you want to check out your county there, I encourage you to do that. That's a little bit of a deep dive into it, but they still need poll workers in pretty much every single county. I looked at the list today. There are lots of different duties and responsibilities, and each county does their own training, and each county pays, everybody gets paid who is a poll worker, and that amount varies from county to county. It's generally around $100 for the day, and you're there all day. Typically, rolls start about 5:30 a.m. and go to about 8 p.m. It is a long day. Take a lunch. It is civically, I think, for me, one of the most special things that you can do. I think it also is a good experience. So if you don't do it this year, but you do it another year, I just would encourage you to think about it, because for me, it certainly puts, it's put a lot of, I have more faith in the election process when I really see all of the checks and balances, and I'm part of that checks and balances. And so to see your county's Board of Elections in action is a pretty cool thing. So if you still have interest in doing it, I would call the phone number. Again, you can find your county Board of Elections phone number at voteohio.gov. I would call directly and ask. There are all kinds of forms that you can fill out online to do so. The first one being on the Ohio Secretary of State's website. In fact, he has a pop-up that you can't get rid of until you're like, no, leave me alone. But go ahead and fill that out, but I would call them directly, just because we're getting very close to the election and they're getting bogged down. And you also have to go through an in-person training prior to election day. So now's the time to do that if you haven't done that. Any questions about becoming a poll worker?
We don't have a question about being a poll worker, but Meredith asked another question on Facebook about counting the ballots.
Uh-huh.
She said, as it relates to counting ballots, what is counted first? Absentee early, then election day?
So the absentee, and I believe in theory this could change from county to county of like literally what happens first, but there's a whole process for balancing the voter rolls, and that happens 4 times a day between who's voted and who hasn't voted in every single precinct. And you may see when you see lots of lists on the walls on election day, that's what's going on there. Those are not votes counted. That's just who's voted in this precinct and who hasn't. And so as the official information from each polling location is taken to the County Board of Elections, they're counted from there. So in theory, it could happen at the same time. Now, what you see is after 7:30, already at that location are all those in-person early votes and the mail-in ballots, right? They're at your county board. And so those can be counted a little quicker, typically. Now, we're not in a typical year, right? We've already seen that there are double the amount of people who are doing absentee ballots. But all of that will very quickly start to process after 7:30 p.m. You'll see here, I just moved the slide to election results, it's going to take more time. So typically, right, if you're watching Channel 10 or you're on the Secretary of State's website watching results come in, what we all see on election night are unofficial results. This year's no different from that, right? Unofficial results have always been unofficial on election night. But typically, 95%, a large percentage of absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, and early voting is the first number that you see, and typically that's the majority of those. It's never 100% of those. So when you see the absentee numbers come in first, and then you start to see 1 out of 400 precincts, 2 out of 400 precincts, 3 out of 400 precincts, right? Those are then as the other ones are getting counted, and then each county board is releasing those unofficial results. Now this year, the complication with that is mostly if you're CNN, right? And you see that absentee ballots are in, and then, 40 out of 80 precincts are in, boy, you feel pretty good about being able to call that election. Now you don't know, here's the thing, absentee ballots that arrive via the post office are going to be processed and counted through November 13th. That's always been the rule. It's just been, there's been very few that are at that last minute, right? So official results never come in until at least 10 days after an election. It's just this year, we don't know how many are going to be in that last spot. So across the country, Secretary of States are saying, please, please, please don't call something too early. And so certainly that is a concern this year. Frank LaRose put out a similar statement, and I'm sure he'll put out an official statement as we get closer to election day about those results. By Ohio Revised Code, certification happens by November 24th. So very official canvases happen after provisional ballots also are counted. Again, these rules are not different than they are in any other year. It's just there's going to be so many mail-in ballots coming in later, perhaps, especially with the issues and timing of the post office. And so, that idea of staying up until 3 a.m, finding out who won or lost, and then going to bed, better or worse, is probably not going to be happening for most races. And these rules are just Ohio's rules, right? So every single state has slightly different, there are some, National Voting Rights Act and things like that. But by and large, a lot of these mechanics are slightly different state by state. And so the timing of these coming in, some states won't be releasing any information until it's completely official, versus Ohio typically has released those unofficial results and then made it official. And so I believe Wisconsin is one of those that won't release until very late. Certainly from a presidential perspective, Wisconsin is likely to matter based on what we know today. And so expect for election night to feel differently, and the weeks that come after that to vote or to feel differently as well. One other thing on election night, and if you voted provisionally, you're not done. You're likely not done. You may still need to cure, and you may hear like the cure period, and that's really about if there is an issue on your provisional ballot where you still have to prove something, whether it's about a last name or an address or your voter eligibility, you have 7 days to do that with your county's Board of Elections. They will typically contact you, certainly via mail. But again, with that 7 days, if you voted provisionally, I would follow up directly with your Board of Elections to see if they need more information from you. any other case, if you voted, you voted. You can track that ballot, but beyond that, you should be good to go. But again, if you voted provisionally, you might not be done on election night. Any other questions about election night? Okay, I'm gonna just very quickly, there are lawsuits still out and still pending. One of the 4 lawsuits has been resolved. That's around prepaid postage. There will not be prepaid postage on your absentee mail-in ballots. There is a lawsuit going on right now about how many drop boxes. Right now, there is one drop box, one official drop box in every single county. There's actually multiple battles and multiple lawsuits going on here. I'm not going to get into the whole drama of it, but Franklin County courts ruled that that county boards could and should allow more drop boxes per and right now in the federal courts. They haven't ruled. They heard testimony yesterday and perhaps today. I do not know when an outcome will come on that. Obviously, by October 6th. And so I don't have a final answer on that, but that's happening and nothing is for sure. Again, as these lawsuits are happening, and this happened with the primary rate, people read one thing and feel like things are final, and then there's an appeal, and then there's another appeal, and who has authority is definitely murky right now. And so these lawsuits going on are still pending. Other one, I don't know why this isn't working with me. There we go. There is also one about the signature match process. This is in particular murky around, when you vote in person, it's a little easier to make that signature match happen. But the League of Women Voters has a lawsuit out about that process, about 1, its constitutionality, and then 2, about the remedies for the fact that it's fairly subjective of how to match, right? Again, one of those tips, slip in a note to your county board of elections if you know that yours isn't going to match right now. So there's no court resolution on that right now. I don't know that we'll get one, certainly by election day, but that is out there. There is a possibility of a change to the signature matching process in Ohio. And there is also another one about whether or not you should be able to request your absentee ballot online. So, right, you can request your voter registration online, but you cannot request your absentee ballot. It was recently ruled legal for email and fax to be able to be used in Franklin County Court. However, that's been appealed by the Secretary of State, and it's now in the 10th Court of Appeals, and we will see whether or not there will be a final resolution on that. For right now, mail that puppy in. Any other questions on the lawsuits?
So we had a question about drop boxes, but not the lawsuits.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, scrolled up. What is the main argument against having more drop boxes under the current circumstances of COVID?
So I think the concern is around whether or not they can be managed and whether or not they can also be, so the Dropbox on October 6th, when it starts to go 24/7, there is actually there's security on that Dropbox. And so having that security, getting that security into place, and making sure people know which ones are definitely the secure Dropbox. I think those are all concerns that have been raised by many folks and the Ohio Secretary of State as well. Anything else? What else do you want to know?
Can we share this presentation once you send it to us?
Yeah. So the presentation, we're on Facebook Live right now, and then we're going to record it, and it's going to live probably on the Matriots YouTube page. Bridget, would you say that's probably right?
Yep, we'll put it on YouTube, and then you can share it on Facebook as well.
And the PDF as well?
Yeah, we probably could do that as well. Yep. Resources. So election day, again, you heard me over and over, voteohio.gov, vote411.org is a great resource by League of Women Voters to find out, one, about who's on your ballot, besides our amazing Matrix candidates, and also a resource for voting questions, and then voting hotline in particular on election day. If you have any issues, 1-866 our vote is a nonpartisan. All three of these are nonpartisan voting resources for you to be able to use. A few nonpartisan, a few political, let me put it that way, resources for you. Just a reminder, Vote Matriots, we have 64 amazing women who we have endorsed who are running in the general election. More information about every single one of them is at matriotsohio.com. They each have their own webpage with more info. And then I would just encourage you to continue to share the stories of the women running. We've made it easy on social media. One, we've got lots of events and Zooms that people can jump into with lots of our candidates. Here's one coming up on September 28th with Franklin County's Treasurer, Cheryl Brooks Sullivan, and then also just you'll see over and over again on our social media profiles on each of our candidates. And so consider sharing those and sharing these women's stories, because ultimately that's what this is about for these women, and about success in elections for any elected officials is really about people knowing what they stand for and what their story is and their why. And so I think certainly for me as a voter, I want to know that, and we provide that opportunity for our candidates that the Matriots have endorsed. I think we've got maybe another question. Bridget, anything else? We're right at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, we have one final question. GJ Sillyman asked, do you know what the best way to contact Congress is? Email, phone calls, and do you know if they get read all that is sent to them?
So typically a congressional office, someone in that congressional office is seeing each piece that goes through and compiling that. What ultimately bounces up to a congressperson, I think varies from office to office. Doesn't matter, right? I think maybe, DJ, that's ultimately the question here. I think it matters if, here's one thing that can't be ignored. When your phone lines are clogged up, when the email inbox for your staff, for your info ads, right, is completely and totally full, and somebody has to go through that, that congressperson knows, right? They feel that energy, whether or not you literally talk to them or they respond directly back to you. And so I think it is a way to have your voice heard. And certainly I think it goes without saying, but voting is your ultimate way to have your voice heard and counted. And so not to discourage connecting directly with your congressperson, but it does matter. All right, Matriots, get out the vote. We're almost there, and just a couple Tuesdays before early voting starts, and mail-in ballots will be on their way.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks. Bye.